I want to make some more long-form podcast-like videos where I can talk about drawing, and some of you may already know that I did have a weekly solo podcast where I would do just that, but I stopped uploading them because I started to prioritize making tutorials. But every so often I find myself wishing that I still kept that podcast going because I want to talk about things, but I don't want to commit to a weekly podcast because sometimes I don't have anything to say. And I also don't want to make any false promises and say that I'll upload a podcast every week, because I do have a tendency to fall behind schedule, usually because I'm spending my time working on something else. So instead, I've decided that every so often I'll make content like this where I can just talk to you all, which isn't really the case because you can't talk back. I guess it's more like I'm talking to myself, but regardless, I think it's nice to make content like this in between other videos, which are usually tutorials. Also, it gives me a reason to create more drawings which can then be shown on screen, and I can draw whatever I want. I don't have to draw something for the purpose of a tutorial. Anyways, now that I have somewhat explained why I'm doing this, let me talk about what I'm here to actually talk about. You see, I was thinking about how I've been approaching my art recently, and so I think I'm just going to talk about that and see where it goes. Now, whilst I will obviously be talking about drawing a lot, I also want to use these as an opportunity to talk about life in general. Think of this as an art and lifestyle podcast, even though I just spent the first 5 minutes explaining why I don't want to start up a podcast again. But I do think that an artist's lifestyle inevitably influences their artwork. I mean, if you think about it, all that you know is all that you know, right? Does that make sense? Like, I suppose in the same way, you don't know what you don't know. And so when you create art, you are using everything you do know, not just in terms of skill, but in terms of everything you have experienced throughout your life. Like, for example, if you said to a person who had never seen a tree before, it's unlikely, I know, but this is an extreme example I'm thinking of on the spot. Maybe this person has never stepped outside or watched TV or browsed the internet. Let's just imagine that they have never seen or heard of a tree. They have no idea what a tree is. Well then, if you asked them to draw a tree, they wouldn't be able to do it. You can't possibly draw what you don't know. And let's say that this person had at one point read a book which briefly described a tree, except this description of a tree was completely inaccurate and said something like, trees are multicoloured and they float in midair. Something that obviously isn't true, right? But let's imagine that this was the first and only time that this person had ever heard of what a tree is. Well then, if this person was asked to draw a tree, then they would base their drawing on the small amount of knowledge that they do know, and they'd try and draw the tree, but it would be multicoloured and be floating in midair. It wouldn't look like a tree at all. It's what we know and also what we don't know which influences our artwork. I suppose that's why when a child draws at a young age, they create what is essentially a collection of scribbles, and as they get a little older and understand the world they live in more clearly, they begin to create more informed drawings. And it's interesting because eventually they have such a clear understanding of how something should be that they begin to judge the success of their drawing based on how well it represents what they intended to draw. And that's where skill gets involved, because they might know everything there is to know about something, but yet they struggle to represent that something in a drawing. But before I talk about skill and go down that road, let me backtrack a little bit, because I remember being sat at my desk in school trying to create a drawing, and I remember being under so much pressure to create a good drawing. And what defined a good drawing back then for me, and also for my classmates, was a drawing that looked like what I was intending to draw. If I was trying to draw a car, it had to look like a car, and the closer it looked to a car, the better the drawing was, and in turn, I was a better artist. I think that's something the majority of us can relate to, and again, your drawing skills come into play, which also influences your artwork, but before skill, comes understanding. If you took a drawing from each year of an artist's life, you'd be able to see how their work evolved over time. Their drawings from when they were a baby likely appeared like any other baby's drawing, a collection of scribbles. Everyone starts at the same starting line, not knowing anything. And so those scribbles are not because the baby lacks skill, it's because they lack understanding. However, the child grows up and starts to gain more of an understanding, and their art starts to evolve. Again, at this point, as a toddler, skill doesn't come into play. It's only their understanding that develops and in turn influences their work. Then it comes to a point, as I mentioned a moment ago, where their understanding has developed so much that it starts to become a basis for critique, right? Because they start to look at their drawings and judge them in comparison to how everything realistically appears. Now, this is where I would say an individual's drawing skills play a part, and this emerges from their understanding, because now they know how something should be, they know very well what they intend to draw, so not understanding isn't a viable excuse anymore as it was for a younger child. And the fact that this excuse no longer exists means they are more accountable for the resulting artwork. It's no longer a lack of understanding, it's a lack of skill. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because skill is something that can be improved, right? It's not so much a forgiving excuse as not understanding enough, especially at a young age. And so we tend to be harder on ourselves if we don't perform as we should. It's that feeling of inadequacy that starts to arise, which is also emphasised by comparing your work with other people who are doing better. And so I think at this stage, everyone is different in regards to how they proceed. I mean, a lot of children conclude that they are just not good at drawing, whilst others continue to draw and improve. Now, at this point, it's not so black and white, because there are so many factors involved which influence your art, especially as a child grows up and develops. And so, to avoid going off on a tangent, I'll try and stay on track with what I'm getting to, because believe it or not, I am trying to make a point and come around full circle. So let me talk about my own experience in regards to what I've just discussed, because I was one of those children that continued to draw. The reason being that, well, there's probably a lot of reasons that need defining more clearly, perhaps in another video, but one of them is that I was good at it in comparison to anything else I would try and do. And again, in line with what I was discussing earlier, when I say I was good at it, I mean that I was good at drawing something and having that something look like it should. That was what defined a good artist for me, at least back then. You also need to consider the fact that I was comparing my work with my peers. There wasn't a lot of us, and so the chance that I was going to be, for lack of a better word, the best, that was highly increased. I was a small fish in a small pond, oblivious to the fact that there is an ocean out there full of other fishes who can also draw. But like I said, what you don't know, you don't know. And that worked in my favour, because thinking I was the best at drawing motivated me to continue doing it. And although I can't help but cringe at my naivety when I was younger, I wouldn't have it any other way. I do feel like I was encouraged to carry on drawing and improve because I received a lot of praise, and I do remember being known as that kid in school who could draw, and so it became part of my identity almost. But to keep this short, let me just say that I had a few years in my late teens where I wouldn't draw nearly as much as I do now, or as much as I did when I was younger. It was something that I picked up again as a result of me not knowing what I wanted to do with my life and thinking, I'm pretty good at drawing, I think. I enjoy doing it, so I should try and do something with it. Anyways, the point being that I continued to draw, and like I said, I can make a video talking about my art over the years and go more in depth, but the reason why this is relevant to what I was discussing earlier is because from my own experience, I can say that it eventually got to a point where it was my understanding that was lacking. And I had this realization maybe a year ago, so let me try and explain. Now, when I say it was my understanding that was lacking, I don't mean my general understanding of life in similarity to a younger baby or a child. What I mean is that my understanding in regards to the subject I was involving myself with was lacking. And I realised this when I discovered the drawing fundamentals. I've discussed this subject many times before, so to avoid repeating myself, if you don't know what the drawing fundamentals are, then I advise you to research them, because you might just learn what I did, which was that these topics involved in the subject of drawing, anatomy, perspective, colour, etc., these are the building blocks to any successful artwork. They are the foundational skills required to be able to draw better from your imagination, if that's what you want to do. Now, I had a very limited understanding of these fundamentals. I was never good at drawing from my imagination, but I wanted to get better at it, and so I saw these to be the stepping stones to get there. If I could broaden my understanding of each of them, in turn, I would improve my drawing skills. So, to put it simply, I was gaining a better understanding of these topics involved in the subject of drawing in an effort to improve my drawing skills. Now, when I'm thinking about everything I've discussed in this video as a whole, I visualize both understanding and skill laid out on a timeline as a bar, right? Like a loading bar from a video game. And also on this timeline are stages of a person's life. Now, at the start of this timeline, there is a baby, and as I discussed earlier, a baby has no understanding and no skill. But as you work your way along this timeline, the child develops and they start to gain more of an understanding. They start to draw with intention because they have the capacity to understand what they set out to draw. And as they get older, the skill factor begins to emerge due to an increased understanding and perception of what's good and what's bad. I think it gets to a point where everyone has a general understanding of life, and so that begins to slow down. People know what they know and don't know what they don't know. Skill, I'd say, also slows down here unless a person is actively working to get better at something, and skill increases alongside another form of understanding which is introduced, I suppose. And this represents an understanding of whatever it is they want to focus on in their life. So now understanding becomes aligned with whatever a person pursues. And this is something that increases simultaneously with their skill in that pursuit. And I mean, this can apply to everything, right? It makes sense to me, but maybe I'm doing a bad job of explaining my thoughts here. Again, take all of this as you will. I'm just speaking my mind, but to try and summarize, I'd say that there is a basic understanding of life that's developed, which eventually transforms into an understanding of specific subjects. In addition to that, skill starts to emerge, and once a person is broadening their understanding of a subject, they are naturally increasing their skill in relevance to that subject. So, in my experience, the subject was drawing, and whilst I was gaining an understanding of the subject and improving my skills for a while, it eventually slowed down, and I was, for a lack of a better word, stagnant. I was continuously drawing from photographs, doing what I could already do, and so to get moving again, I started to learn the drawing fundamentals, which improved my understanding of the topics involved, and as a result, improved my drawing skills. I was learning something that I didn't know in relevance to the subject that I wanted to pursue. And that's how people become masters in their field, right? They continue to learn and understand what's involved. And so that's how I'm currently approaching drawing. I'm trying to learn more. That's why I have recently introduced videos on the subject of anatomy, and I've made a lot of content surrounding perspective, which has, in turn, allowed me to draw from my imagination. Anyways, I have rambled on for a long time now, and I'm still not sure I got to the point I was trying to get to, but you know, I enjoyed discussing all of this, so I hope you enjoyed watching or listening, and I'll see you in the next one. If you enjoyed the content I create, then do consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You will gain access to exclusive tutorials, study documents, process papers, real-time drawing footage and more. Plus you will also be supporting me in a more personal way. Other than that, thank you for watching this video and I'll see you soon.